Judge ready? Partner? Gentlemen? Let us begin. Because gun violence in the United States has gone too far and gone on for too long, my partner and I are proud to affirm today's resolution that the United States federal government should repeal the Second Amendment. Now, I'd like to thank everyone here for making this debate possible. Now, I'm just going to start with definitions, framework, all of that good stuff, then move on to plan and advantages. So let's start off with the definitions in today's debate. Now, we'd just like to clarify that in this case, the USFG actually is the U.S. Congress and the governments of the states, because that is the process through which the Constitution can be amended. So that was just contextually insinuated in the resolution. And repeal the Second Amendment is just pretty much going to be defined by our plan. Now, the weighing mechanism for this debate is going to be net benefits in the United States. Now let's move on to the plan itself. The plan is going to be that as soon as possible, the United States federal government and the governments of the states are going to pass a constitutional amendment repealing the Second Amendment. Very simple. I don't think there should be any questions, but if there are any questions on the plan or other framework, please ask them now.
Alright, so you're repealing the Second Amendment, are you not replacing it with any other provision, correct?
No, our plan is not actually replacing it with anything else, because that would be extra topical.
Okay.
Now, yeah, so pretty simple plan. Now, let's move on to our advantages in today's debate. There are going to be two main advantages. The first advantage is going to be about gun crime. Now, subpoint A is the uniqueness. Right now, gun crime is high because gun ownership is high. We see that in the status quo, the United States, compared to most other nations, let's take the UK, for example. In 2011, the US had 43 times the gun homicide rate per 100,000 people compared to the UK. So we're seeing that we have a really high rate. We have thousands of gun homicides every year. In the United States, according to the Washington Post, 60% of US homicides are conducted using firearms. So we see that the ownership of firearms is really a big problem because people are allowed to kill using these guns in the status quo. Subpoint B is the link here. First off, we're going to see that when we give Congress the ability, or the states the ability, to pass laws that can limit gun ownership, we're making it so that it's easier for people. We're making it so that it can eventually become more difficult for these people to own guns. When it becomes more difficult for people to own guns, we are going to see a lower gun ownership rate, and we are going to see a decrease in gun homicide. Now, we can look directly at the evidence for this. Let's look at the ownership in a couple different countries. We can look at how in the UK, they have 6.7 gun homicides for every... 6.7 gun homicide for every one... No, sorry, 6.7 guns for every 100 people. A lot less than the U.S., which is way up at over 87. And so we're seeing a direct correlation between these two, and we can actually prove that that is causation. We see that in Canada, they have 23.8 guns per people and have a much lower rate. They actually have a much lower gun homicide rate as well. So we're seeing we're going to see a lot less gun homicide rates if we pass the affirmation plan. Now let's move on to the impacts here. When we have less gun homicide, we're pretty much saving lives. We don't really need to talk anymore. There is no more terminalization for that link because we have a direct link to killing human lives, and we don't want that. That is why we need to pass the plan if we are to decrease the amount of gun homicide in the United States. Yeah?
I have a question. In the UK and Canada, are guns actually banned from ownership?
No, guns are not banned for ownership, but if you're trying to set us up in a way that you are going to compare us to these nations, we aren't doing anything that would ban all guns from ownership either. We're just setting the stage for any future gun restrictions. So now let's move on to the second advantage, which is on the issue of guns not being needed and the harms that do come with these guns just sitting around. Now, subpoint A is the uniqueness once again. Right now, people own guns mainly either to protect themselves, or in the case they think that they can rise up against the United States if the United States turns into a fascist government and tries to start oppressing the people. Now, we see that this simply doesn't make sense. The United States federal government has tanks, they have B-2 bombers, they could nuke all of the United States if they wanted, they could send drones on us. It doesn't matter if we have a few shotguns. we aren't going to be able to stand up to the United States. So they can't claim any benefits or any harms by the passage of the affirmation plan about a decreased ability to stand up against the United States federal government. And on the issue of people using guns to protect themselves, we can actually look at what the Oxford Journal has said. According to the Oxford Journal, quote, "Those with firearms in their homes are far more likely to die from a firearm homicide. This comes largely because many of the people who do not own guns in the United States Many of the people who do not own guns in the United States, or who do own guns in the United States, do not know how to adequately use them. What this does is that when an invader comes into their home, then they are more likely to lose control of the gun and have the invader in turn use it on the gun owner. That is very dangerous for them, but there is also the very high risk of people inside the house accidentally finding the guns and accidentally shooting them off, which is only leading to more and more deaths. So what we really need to do is, subpoint B is the link. When we pass the plan, when we repeal the Second Amendment, we once again set the stage for the United States to restrict gun ownership. When we have restricted gun ownership, then that leads to a decrease in the overall rate of death that we are going to see. We aren't going to be seeing any benefit or any harms from the passage of the affirmation plan. The negation is going to come up here and just present you with a load of defense, but you can't vote for them because of that. You need to vote for us because we are the only team with offense. Let's also talk about the issue of domestic terrorism. We see that according to the FBI, domestic terrorism is the #1 threat in the United States. We have school shootings, and so we just see that there's a lot of problems in the status quo, especially with domestic terrorism. So we need to do something to solve that, and placing restrictions on gun ownership is what we need to do, or it's simply setting the stage for restrictions to be passed. We'd also like to point out that I've brought this up multiple times, protected time, sorry, but I've brought this up plenty of times throughout my speech. We are not actually doing anything to straight up reduce gun ownership. We're simply setting the stage for it, so they can't claim any offense off of that. So you can't buy their arguments there, and you need to vote for the act because we are decreasing gun crime, and we have proven that guns are not needed.
Judge? I'd like to thank you all for coming here and witnessing this great debate. However, I believe that there are several key problems with the government team's plan that they failed to adequately address in their last speech, and that will prove completely fatal to their case. Now, I'd like to point out that we agree with their definitions and that this is a policy resolution. Now let's look to our first disadvantage, or the reason why we believe that their plan will actually be harmful. Now, our first disadvantage is going to be that of precedent. Again, precedent. And our subpoint A is going to be that the Constitution is foundational. Again, the Constitution is foundational. Judge, the Constitution is the foundation of our very law system. It is the foundation of the rights that we hold as Americans. It is extremely important because it dates back to the founding of this country. I don't think that we can deny that the Constitution is important to us as Americans, which leads me to my subpoint B, which is that of their plan repeals a part of the Constitution, obviously, because they're repealing the Second Amendment. This is self-explanatory. But our subpoint C is that instability is created. Instability is created, and here's why. See, by repealing the Second Amendment, what we're saying is that essentially it's okay to take away parts of our Constitution just because of public opinion or certain circumstances, such as the Newtown shooting at a rise, that changed public opinion and caused people to want to take away the Second Amendment. Now, what this means, and this leads us to subpoint C, or an internal link, is that future turmoil is created because what we can see is that this opens the door for exceptions to the Constitution. In other words, people might say, how about we start restricting, let's say, the Fourth Amendment or the First Amendment? Essentially what happens is that we see that there's no end to the violations of the Constitution that could take place. Now I need to get to some stuff. Let's look at our second disadvantage, which is going to be that of a crime wave. Again, a crime wave. This is going to be a very in-depth disadvantage, so I'd like everyone to pay close attention here. Our subpoint A is that the government wants gun control. Again, the government wants gun control. You see, in the aftermath of the Newtown shooting and other shooting massacres, the government has been pushing for gun control. The only thing in the way of that is that pesky Second Amendment, which is also part of our Constitution, which prevents us from doing more effective gun control measures, or effective as the government team would have you believe. However, what we can see through subpoint B is that if the Second Amendment is repealed, the government will implement gun control. Obama himself has stated that he favors gun control, and therefore the government team in this round must therefore advocate gun control itself, because that is the natural result, because the real United States government will pass gun control laws without the Second Amendment to stop them. Our subpoint C is that gun control increases crime. Gun control increases crime. And now this is where it gets in depth. You see, policy mix says that Detroit has the second highest murder rate in the nation, and it's because, and the article specifically says because of their high gun control laws. You see, what happens is that this has taken weapons away from the people that are trying to defend themselves against the criminals. Now, Judge, I'd like to make an important note here. Gun control, repeat, gun control will not stop criminals from getting weapons. It cannot stop criminals from getting weapons. It can only stop the people from defending themselves with weapons against the criminals. It's simply not logical to take away their people's guns, because this won't stop people that want to get guns from killing people. Like with Adam Lanza, for example, he was able to get a gun even though he had mental health issues that prevented him from getting a gun. He simply took it from his mother. Your point?
Yes. Wouldn't you agree that that's exactly the problem in the status quo, that people with unstable backgrounds are able to access guns due to a lack of gun control and lack of background checks?
Gun control wouldn't have mattered. First of all, he could get it from his mother. Second of all, he could have just simply driven to another state where there was no gun control. And that's the problem with your advocacy. Our subpoint D is Chicago. And Chicago happens to have over 500 murders in the year 2012. And it also happens to have some of the strictest gun laws in the nation. Judge, I don't think we can dismiss these two examples as fringe examples or out of hand, because both of these cities clearly have high gun control policies. They also happen to have a couple of the highest murder rates in the nation. Clearly, gun control hasn't been working here. Let's look at subpoint E, which is out of Switzerland. Now, I know you probably hear this a lot, but Switzerland has, per 100,000 people, 0.7 homicides, one of the lowest in the world. This cannot simply be dismissed. That's according to the Police Statistics Crime Annual Report of Switzerland 2010. And Judge, Switzerland, with their lack of gun control, clearly has one of the lowest murder rates in the world. Judge, if this isn't empirical evidence, I don't know what is. This clearly refutes their entire advocacy, clearly showing that actually gun control is ineffective. Therefore, in today's debate, with the evidence presented, we can clearly see that more people die, there's more crime when there is gun control. Not now. Disadvantage 3 is that of Republican backlash. Again, Republican backlash. And this is where it gets interesting, as I'm sure we talked about in the lectures, but subpoint A is that the Republicans are for the Second Amendment. We all know this. Republicans are huge advocates of the Second Amendment. They love the Second Amendment. They love their guns. However, our subpoint B is that repealing the Second Amendment will anger Republicans. Republicans would hate that. If that happened, which is unlikely, but that's not our purpose in today's debate, but if it did happen, Republicans would clearly be very mad, and all their supporters would be very mad. And our subpoint C is they will not compromise on immigration reform. Again, they will not compromise on immigration reform. This is the impact. You see, Republicans right now are kind of on the edge as far as issues on like immigration reform. More Republicans are beginning to kind of see the light of day as far as immigration reform. However, if we repeal the Second Amendment, there is no way they're going to compromise on this. That's how political backlash works. Subpoint D is that they won't compromise on the economy. They won't compromise on the economy because right now they're already reluctant to compromise. This, I'm sure, will make them completely unwilling to compromise at all in the economy. Therefore, our subpoints E and F are going to be terminalized impacts. Subpoint E is that immigrant children will suffer. There's no way that anything like the DREAM Act is going to pass. The Republicans will never let it pass. Immigrants will continue to suffer discrimination and stigmatization. And subpoint F is that the economy will suffer with no kind of change in the current status quo. Jobs will be lost without any kind of effective policy. And not only that, but if another debt ceiling issue happens to come up, I'm sure the Republicans will not be willing to compromise, which once again could potentially spiral our country into a double-dip recession if we completely stop spending and fail to create new jobs. Our disadvantage 4 is that of jobs lost. See, the gun industry employs 100,000 people a year, and obviously if we repeal the Second Amendment, the government will implement gun control and put these companies out of business, losing 100,000 jobs, leads to poverty and a lower quality of life. I think we can all agree this is a very negative impact. And then finally, I'd like to make a solvency point refuting actually their case and their advantages. And the solvency point is that people will hoard weapons and therefore their case will backfire because people will all rush to buy weapons, which will in fact backfire the whole point of their case. And looking at their advantages, I would like to refute actually one of their advantages by simply saying that the Newtown, Connecticut massacre proves that they're wrong when they say that it reduced domestic terrorism. Thank you. For all these reasons, I urge an opposition ballot. Thank you.
All right. So, is everyone ready? All right. Then, as I begin, I'd like to first off extend a hearty thanks to everybody for being here today and making the following resolution debatable. The United States federal government should repeal the Second Amendment. What I'm going to be doing in today's speech is just going over the negation case, seeing as framework as I'll accept it, that's all fine, whatever. And I'd also like to point out that the reason I'm not going to be spending a whole lot of time on the affirmation case is because they really had no clash with the affirmation case. Practically all of our points were dropped, and I guess they tried to assume that you'll cross-apply all of their detriments to our contentions, but the reality is that not only do their contentions not stand, but such kind of cross-applying kind of can't go without saying. You actually have to kind of cross-apply that in your speech. And seeing as nothing was done, practically our whole point about how it's not needed for home defense, and the fact that the framers' intent isn't valid anymore, plus the fact that domestic terrorism was refuted off time, we can clearly see that all three of our points clearly stand in today's round and all the impacts flow through. Now going straight over the disadvantages brought up by the negation. The first being is precedent, saying that, oh well, if we mess up the Constitution, then all this bad stuff is going to happen, future turmoil, blah, 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 blah. First of all, the Constitution was designed to be a fluid document. It was designed to change as the times change. And clearly, as we can see, gun policy will have to change as the kind of guns and weaponry we use are changing as well. Not only that, but I also have a second response to this regarding the fact that we already do change the Constitution. We already kind of limit it a little bit. My prime example would be regarding the First Amendment. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. If you're putting yourself or others in harm's way, we can also see that we're actually limiting the amount of we're limiting rights in the name of protection, in the name of safety, which is exactly what the gun debate is all about: rights versus safety. And that's so. Therefore, their first contention doesn't really stand, seeing as it's non-unique to the affirmation policy, and the fact that they clearly don't have an understanding of what the Constitution was designed to do. It was designed to be a fluid document, and we already changed it. Now regarding I'm not going to go point by point with the sub-contention, seeing as it's all just one fluid argument. My reputation will be sufficient for that. I might get to you at the end of my speech. I think I might have a bit too much to get through. Now, my second contention, the second contention is regarding the crime wave, and they're talking about, oh, well, look at Detroit and Chicago. Well, quick observation regarding their evidence, which kind of debunks all of it. All they're saying is that it's high murder rates, not high gun murder rates. They're having this correlation without any actual direct causation. They're not saying, look at all these murder rates caused by illegal guns. No, they're saying, look at all these high murder rates. That must be bad, right? I mean, they also have severe gun control. There's no causation there. There's no actual link between high gun control and high murder rates. All they're having is that the reality is that the cities that they reference are actually big gang cities. Detroit and Chicago, are you kidding me? Of course you're going to have high violence. We're not trying to stop high violence. We're trying to stop high gun murder violence, and that's what we're talking about. They also bring up Switzerland, but again, all they bring up is homicides, not actual gun violence. So what we can clearly see here is that their evidence is lacking a serious amount of causation, plus the fact that they're talking about how they also try to bring up the fact that it's a natural result of that gun control will happen in the wake of our plan. I have two refutations of this. The first being, we're not advocating directly for gun control, even if it is even if they're trying to assume that it'll pass otherwise. Well, all we're trying to advocate is that we're trying to stop the constitutional barrier from creating gun control. So they can't really force that burden upon us. It really isn't making much sense. Also, the fact of the matter is that if such gun control is passed and such problems can arise with that legislation can also be appealed. That's the wonderful thing about a government, is that it can kind of cop out on its decisions if it's not working. So they also can't tie in huge terminal impacts with the whole idea of gun regulation having big problems. Again, I'm sorry, I still have two more contentions to go through. Now going on to the third contention regarding political backlash. I have a primary refutation of this, which is regarding the fact that in the current status quo, I'll even quote my opponents here in saying that the Republicans are reluctant to compromise. Essentially, the point here is that all of the things that he's talking about, immigration reform, the economy, all of these issues are practically all of these issues won't really be teetering on the edge, or the Gun Control Act won't repealing the Second Amendment isn't necessarily going to push them over the edge. There's no real proof of that. There's no real link there. All they're saying is that, oh, this scary stuff could happen, even though the reality is that it's probably not going to happen anyway. Seeing as they haven't given actual political evidence regarding this, and it's all just speculation on their part, I'm providing counter-speculation regarding the fact that we actually decrease argumentation in Congress because we're getting impacts from better time. Sorry, I'm kind of losing my train of thought here. Essentially, the reality is that the reluctance to compromise is practically our turn, seeing as they're not willing to compromise anyway. Therefore, the speculation on their point is practically all they have to go on this point. They don't actually have any warrants to that argument. Now, their fourth contention regarding job loss, and essentially what they tried to say is that, oh, we'll be losing jobs. Again, we're not tied down to the whole idea of having gun control, the loss of jobs could be compensated with the fact that gun control regulation could also need people to kind of enforce that gun control, and so we could also have jobs compensating for the fact that we need people to stop something like hoarding weapons, which is their solvency argument. Again, I'd like to point out the fact that in the future, things like that could be prevented with the constitutional barrier of the Second Amendment being completely taken out. So the reality is that when we're looking at their case, not only are the examples that they bring up not relevant because there is actually no real causation, and seeing as we have direct causation with the examples we brought, like such as UK and Canada, points that were not refuted, points that or examples that were not even touched upon, we can see that our counter evidence and counter speculation practically destroys all four of their disadvantages, which is all they've actually had to present in the debate. Now I'm going to go on the case a little bit and talk about the 3 points I have. I'm sorry for taking time. I'm going to talk about the 3 points that we brought about and kind of terminalize those impacts once more, as they were not really addressed. Again, they tried to talk about domestic terrorism with one school shooting, but we can see that here again is that not only was that not on case, but even if you don't buy that, we can see that by getting rid of the constitutional barriers that would have stopped something like that from happening, we can see that that's actually a point for the affirmation. Now, what I really want to stress here is that the Second Amendment is something that's essentially outdated, not necessary, and in our way. Those are the 3 criteria that are causing us to make this decision, that are causing us to weigh this on net benefits. Because as we can see here, all of their detriments are invalid or untrue or just speculation on their part on faulty evidence, and all of the advantages we have are very true to the status quo. The fact that you're actually in more danger of having a gun in your home. The fact that the framer's intent is invalid and so forth, therefore the argument doesn't really stand. And the third fact that domestic terrorism is still alive at large and a big problem, a point that wasn't refuted. The fact that we could potentially be solving for that is something that has to go addressed. Thank you for your time.
As a brief off-time roadmap, I will first be going on case to address my opponent's arguments, and then I will be strengthening our own if time allows. So, moving right into today's debate, I would first like to point out that my opponents are acting as a moving target here, because their entire point in their plan text is, as they claim themselves, well, they're opening the door for gun control. They're not themselves tied down to it. However, all of their advantages directly relate to the fact that gun control would be passed and the speculation that gun control would be passed. So they're in fact contradicting themselves in this statement. So, and since the debate you'll be expecting to having had to do with the fact that gun control would be passed, and since that is the only logical conclusion that you can arrive from their plan text, they must stick with this. They cannot simply be switching it around to whatever suits them. So moving on to their first advantage, which is that of raised gun crime. And they use the example of the United Kingdom and of Canada. However, as they said themselves, we can't compare ourselves to these countries because they're different in their regards of actual gun control laws. And furthermore, our disadvantage 2 directly refutes that, so you can counter-apply that to advantage 1. In addition, their impact with this is that they will be saving lives. However, I have 2 responses to this. First of all, gun control would only take the guns away from the innocents, not from the criminals who would be defending themselves. And if that wasn't enough and you don't buy that, we have shown you that the jobs lost through our disadvantage 4 would be putting people in even more poverty. And I would argue that putting people in poverty and forcing them to live in suffering is worse than killing them, because you are forcing them to live in pain and misery every single day of their lives. So clearly that entire disadvantage has been torn apart. In regards to their disadvantage 2, that guns aren't needed, they seem to be ignoring the entire issue of recreational hunting here. Recreational hunting is a liberty of the American people, and that does not in any way have to do with safety. Yes.
How does that actually respond to the initial argument that we were making regarding the fact that the framers' intent of rising up against the government is invalid? How does hunting tie into that?
Regarding your general tagline, which is that guns are not needed, and in fact we are showing you that they are needed and can be used for hunting, not at this time. In addition, as regards to their, their advantage 3 was that it reduced terrorism. However, terrorists from Al-Qaeda, if they are suggesting Middle Eastern terrorists or terrorists through the Al-Qaeda organization, will still get guns because they don't even buy them in the U.S. Not at this time, thank you. I have a lot to get through. And then in addition to that, if these terrorists are domestic, they can easily still have access to guns through Mexican cartels or on the black market. So as we are saying, all we are doing is taking guns away from the people. We are not taking guns away from the terrorists, which directly goes against their third advantage. So clearly all 3 of their advantages fall because you simply cannot buy them. They're entirely refuted. Now, moving on to our case, our first disadvantage of precedent set. They say that, well, the Constitution is designed to be changed. And yes, it would be ignorant to argue otherwise. However, we are not talking about adding we are talking about adding an amendment. But that includes the repealing of an entire amendment. And never has that been done before. Not at this time, thank you. So, as we are showing, this could cause a great deal of unrest and a dramatic series of dangerous events. So that falls. I'm sorry, not at this time. In addition, our disadvantage 2 of the crime wave, we can use this, which they have not really refuted except in their first advantage, and we have shown you that this is in fact greater than their advantage. And I would just like to point out the one refutation they did make against that was that we have shown no actual causation between the gun control laws and the high murder rates. Well, maybe they missed when my partner mentioned that in the article specifically it said that those high murder rates are due to gun control. My partner said that, and that was directly in our case. And that is, again, in the article by policy. Nick, not at this time, thank you. And in addition, our third disadvantage, that the Republicans will backlash. They say that, well, we're just speculating here. I would first like to point out that their case is also based in speculation, but if you don't buy that, according to an article in the New York Times, several members of Congress that are Republicans have said that they will vote against the immigration bill if gun control is passed, which would be the result of their plan. So we are showing you direct causation. This is not just speculation. Republicans have admitted to this, so there will be Republican backlash. In addition, the force of the Tea Party is something to be reckoned with, and they would easily get upset. And so we are showing you that this immigration bill is on the brink and in danger if these Republicans do not vote for it. Now, our disadvantage 4 is the loss of jobs. We are clearly saying that it will lose 100,000 jobs. And again, they refute this saying, well, we're not saying directly that it's going to lead to gun control, so they're not necessarily going to lose their jobs. This is, again, being a moving target and just changing this in order to whatever suits them the best. They're saying themselves at the time that gun control would be the probable result of this, but then at the same time they're saying we're not necessarily saying that gun control will happen. So as I mentioned, they're just skewing themselves in this instance. And so clearly, if gun control happens, yes.
Yeah, where exactly in our plan text did we pass gun control?
As I said, as I was mentioning, you did not specifically say it in your plan text. However, you did admit outside of the plan text that we are opening the door for gun control, and when attacking our argument, you said that gun control would be the result. And now, so as I mentioned, continuing to strengthen our fourth disadvantage, these 100,000 people, will lose their job. And that is according to an article from Business Insider. This directly states that the gun control would cause 100,000 people to be unemployed, which hurts the economy and, as we mentioned, puts them in a life of poverty and a life of suffering. So clearly this leads to a lower quality of life. And for these reasons, you should be voting nay on today's debate. Thank you.
Are you ready? Mm-hmm. Everything? Alright, well, it's been a very entertaining debate round. However, I believe that the opposition has already won this round for a variety of reasons. Now, in this debate, I'm going to ask everyone to put aside the preconceived notions about gun control and simply look at the facts. The facts are, the examples that we have, gun control simply has not been working. And we can clearly see this by looking even at their own example of the Newtown, Connecticut shooting. Connecticut had some of the toughest gun laws in the nation, and yet that didn't stop this man from getting a gun. The simple truth, Judge, is that although it may be a noble idea, it doesn't really stop the root of the problem, and that's going to be a major theme of the opposition in today's debate.
I'd like to raise a point of order. The fact that gun control isn't working is a point that hasn't been brought up in today's debate. All they basically talked about is whether or not we're actually talking about gun control.
This is simply not true. I brought this up multiple times in my first speech. I have no idea what you're talking about. My first voting issue is that the government plan destroys human life. Again, their plan destroys human life. Let's look at the examples, first of all, of Chicago and Detroit. Once again, we provided evidence that said because of these strict gun laws, Detroit had the second highest murder in the nation. Chicago also had over 500 murders in 2012, and once again, had some of the strictest gun laws in the nation. And once again, Judge, this crime occurred because these nations had strict gun control. Therefore, because of this, what we can see is that their plan, which, by the way, would take away the Second Amendment and allow the government to implement gun control, which they have said that they advocate multiple times, once again, Judge, this would cause an increased crime wave. And if we look at the example of Switzerland, Judge, I believe this is a very powerful example. An entire country with no gun control has flourished with 0.7 homicides per 100,000 people. I think this is the strongest example in today's debate round and clearly proves their entire position false. And Judge, I'd also like to point out that they can't come up and say that our plan will not implement gun control, because the fact is that one, the government has repeatedly stated that that Obama has stated that he favors gun control, and two, that is the natural cause and that what will happen if they do repeal the Second Amendment, and three, their advantages depend upon repealing gun control. Their advantages that essentially talking about how people don't need guns, about how it will cause less gun massacres, reduce domestic terrorism. They're contradicting themselves. Those are all based upon the premise that there will be gun control. Therefore, I think they've confused their own plan or something, because this clearly doesn't make any sense. Now, if you look once again, I'm going to be going once again with our disadvantages. We can look at the disadvantage of the backlash, which leads me to my second voting issue, because this is a very important disadvantage, which is that their plan destroys compromise. Again, their plan will destroy compromise. Judge, they tried to pull a non-unique on us and say, well, the Republicans aren't going to compromise anyways. Well, Judge, one, I would like to point out that the Republicans have recently been on the brink in regards to that. They have been seeming to come around on certain issues, and it seems as though they're finally willing to come to the table on certain issues such as immigration. But two, the fact is that we can clearly see that there will be absolutely no chance of this happening if we repeal the Second Amendment. The Republicans are never going to compromise on these issues. And we can clearly also see that Congress members themselves said that they refused to pass immigration if the gun control law was passed recently. And so what this means is, once again, Judge, the Republicans will absolutely not compromise if this Second Amendment is repealed. Will there be any chance? No. So you have some chance versus no chance. Think about that when you make your decision. They will not compromise on immigration or economy if you pass this plan, if you repeal the Second Amendment. Immigrant children will continue to suffer in the United States because they're being denied their rights, and we can also see that the economy will continue to suffer in a downward spiral if we don't resolve certain important issues. We're not out of the woods yet in the economy. Now, I'd like to look to our fourth disadvantage, Judge. And once again, we can clearly see, as my partner pointed out, 100,000 jobs will be lost. This is simply a fact, because once again, they tried to school out of this by saying we're not tied down. Judge, I've already refuted that argument. And they said that, essentially, they said also something about we need jobs to enforce gun control. I'm not sure where this came from. Once again, Judge, we can clearly see 100,000 jobs will be lost if we implement their plan. And now let's look to the solvency point that we talked about, where we said their plan would backfire because people will hoard weapons. You see, this has been proven in the past that when the government starts talking about gun regulations, people buy more guns, and what happens? This is the backfiring of their plan. And therefore, people only have more guns, so they're not even solving for their entire case. I'd also like to point out that actually in my first speech, I cross-applied solvency to the advantages because none of them will happen if people hoard guns, because people will still have guns. People will hide them from the government, Judge. Not everyone is a law-abiding citizen. People will still own guns. Now I'd like to look to my third advantage, my third voting issue, which is that they have no solvency, and this is very important. Judge, we can clearly see that in the end, their case is refuted directly by our Chicago and Detroit examples. We can also see we turn their example of domestic terrorism and their examples of the UK and Canada had actually no correlation. For all these reasons, because we're saving lives and not them, I urge an opposition ballot. Thank you.
good to go?
Yeah.
So I'd like to finish off this debate by just showing you how exactly the affirmation is won today. I'd like to start off on the issue of the whole, what exactly is the affirmation doing in today's debate. Now, we talked about, our plan text was simply that we are going to have the United States federal government and the state governments pass a constitutional amendment that is repealing the Second Amendment. Nowhere in our plan text did we actually say that we are going to be passing any sort of gun control. So they can make these claims if they want, that there is going to be gun control, but we never in our plan actually stated that, so they can't actually claim anything off of that. So actually, if you want, yeah, we'll concede all of the arguments on the flow, and because your only arguments on the flow also came from the passage of gun violence, so you no longer have any links. So there is only going to be one main link on this case because it is the only remaining argument. And that is the point that my partner brought up, is that what our plan, all we actually do is decrease argument in Congress. He brought this up in his speech, and you completely dropped this in the entire neg block. Now, this was a direct turn against the negation case. He told you that since we decrease argument in Congress, then we have more time to spend on this other stuff. This turned all of your possible political impact. Since this is the only actual argument that has an actual link to the affirmation plan, then that is the only main impact in the round today. So you need to be voting for the affirmation on that today. We're the only team getting any political impacts, which are actually the only standing impacts in today's round. But let's just go on and assume that gun control is passing, and gun control is going to pass under the affirmation plan. And let's look at how this really affects the flow. So let's start off with let's start off on our case. Now, our case went pretty much completely dropped. Now, I'd really like to talk about the issues of Canada, the UK, versus Detroit and Chicago. Now, my partner brought up about Detroit and Chicago, that these are major gang cities, so there is actually no causality reference there. My partner made this argument, and it was completely dropped by the negation. So that was their only actual evidence for gun violence about gun control here. So we're going to see that our evidence actually is the only standing evidence, because they never provided any reason why the UK and Canada are irrelevant. They just said that they don't count. I think two whole countries that have successfully passed gun control and had successful decreases in gun violence is actually much more relevant than 2 points that were completely negated by my partner and dropped by the negation. So we see that, as I said earlier, our case was pretty much completely dropped by the neg. Now, they just tried to cross-apply their contentions, which was done only in their second speech here. But they also, let's go over our second advantage about how it's not needed. They completely dropped this. And the key impact here is that if they concede that guns aren't needed, then that means that we don't need these guns. We can pass whatever gun regulation we want. And since my partner and I have proved that when we have gun control, then we do have lower crime rates. We are making it so that it is going to be a more net. We are going to see net benefits to the status quo. We already talked about all the evidence regarding UK, regarding Canada, regarding Australia, Japan, all these other countries that have seen large decreases in gun violence because of gun control passing. Now, the negation has come up, and they've tried to provide you with evidence about gun violence going up, but all of their points throughout this debate have just been about murder rates. They have not once told you about firearm homicide rates. My partner has brought this up again and again, and they never even responded to this. They never told you that they were actually talking about firearm homicide rates. So you can wipe all of their numbers arguments off of the flow, and we're the only team that is actually showing you that there is going to be any benefit to the status quo from the passage of the affirmation plan. Now, just because I have a lot to get to, I'd like to point out a couple quick things. One, about the precedent argument. We have already actually appealed the amendment. That's called a prohibition. You'll learn about it. Now, so that completely follows. Yes, that is a new argument, but it is because you only brought that up in the block. Now, in response to your second advantage, crime wage, my partner proved that this wasn't true. We can actually just completely go against this. And on the issue of the crime wave and the rising gun purchasing, we can see that if we do pass gun control, like you have said we were going to do, then that would prevent people from buying guns. So that point is completely moot. The backlash point, I already talked this about when I was on politics, and jobs lost. My partner refuted this. His reputation about jobs being created for enforcement was dropped. So we're winning across the flow today. Sorry I didn't have time to wait. I just had a lot to get through. Thank you. Have a nice night. I've been here all week, and I'm here all next week too.